Welcome, welcome. Hi, everybody. And I just suddenly realised I'm about to start reading and I haven't even got the tablet out to read from. How daft is that? Oops, don't drop that. I'll just get this plugged in here so that we don't have any problems. There we go. Set up and get the iPad mini running. So how is everybody? Have you been keeping busy? What sort of busy have you been keeping? And no, you don't have to answer that. So what have I been up to? I've been doing things like accounting and GST, which is kind of a subset of accounting, and grocery shopping, cooking dinner, washing and folding, well, washing and hanging laundry, haven't folded it yet. The usual sort of stuff that I do when I'm not reading or playing on the computer. Oh, and I've also been doing some more, not product photography, but putting descriptions online, which I think I mentioned last time, and editing images so that I can put a whole lot more on our listing for our urn business, our funeral urn business. So I'll just move this keyboard a little bit so I can get the microphone slightly closer to me. Yeah, here we go. Now, do you have your drink of water at hand for when you need it? And your snacks and your nice comfortable seat? Because I'm about to start reading. And this is a 28-page chapter at this font size, so it's another one of the long ones. I think this author likes long chapters. So here we go. I am reading The Railway Children by Nesbit, Edith Nesbit, and you can find her in some libraries, and you can also find her books through Gutenberg.org, Gutenberg, Gutenberg.org. I'm back again, sorry. I didn't select the box when I started typing, so that disappeared. Weird. Right, I'm just typing it in the box now, and I've clicked in the wrong place. Gutenberg.org. I'll get you to recite it with me next time. And Project Gutenberg, which is what that link is for, has public domain books that have been out of print for a long time, not just out of print, but have exceeded their copyright period, and so they're now available for anyone to read. And I like getting books from there because they're often very old-fashioned and lots of fun. There's fiction and non-fiction, all sorts. So we shall be reading The Railway Children by Edith Nesbit, E. Nesbit, Chapter 8, The Amateur Firemen. Now remember, this book has a lot to do with railways and trains, since it's called The Railway Children. So firemen here are probably not the ones that put out fires in buildings. They're probably the men who stoke the trains. Right, that's a likely little brooch you've got on, miss, said Perks the porter. I don't know as ever I seen a thing more like a buttercup without it was a buttercup. Yes, said Bobby, glad and flushed by his approval. I always thought it was more like a buttercup almost than even a real one, and I never thought it would come to be mine, my very own, and then Mother gave it to me for my birthday. Oh, have you had a birthday? Said Perks, and he seemed quite surprised, as though a birthday were a thing only granted a favoured few. Yes, said Bobby. When's your birthday, Mr. Perks? The children were taking tea with Mr. Perks in the porter's room among the lamps and railway almanacs. They had brought their own cups and some jam turnovers. Mr. Perks made tea in a beer can, as usual, and everyone felt very happy and confidential. My birthday, said Perks, tipping some more dark brown tea out of the can into Peter's cup. I give up keeping on of my birthday afore you was born. Sorry, very, very itchy nose, probably because I went and said hello to the cat just before. But you must have been born sometime, you know, said Phyllis thoughtfully, even if it was 20 years ago, or 30, or 60, or 70. Not so long as that, miss. Perks grinned as he answered, If you really want to know, it was 32 years ago, come the 15th of this month. So he's not that old, really. Not by my standards, anyway. "Then why don't you keep it?" asked Phyllis. "I've got something else to keep besides birthdays," said Perks briefly. "Oh, what?" asked Phyllis eagerly. "Not secrets?" "No," said Perks. "The kids and the missus." It was this talk that set the children thinking, and presently talking. Perks was, on the whole, the dearest friend they had made. Not so grand as the station master, but more approachable, less powerful than the old man, but more confidential. "It seems horrid that nobody keeps his birthday," said Bobby. "Couldn't we do something?" "Let's go to the canal bridge and talk it over," said Peter. "I've got a new gut line from the postman this morning. He gave it to me for a bunch of roses I gave him for his sweetheart. She's ill." "Then I do think you might have given her the roses for nothing," said Bobby indignantly, instead of getting something for it. "Nya," said Peter disagreeably, and put his hands in his pockets. "He did, of course," said Phyllis in haste. "Directly we heard she was ill, we got the roses ready and waited by the gate. It was when you were making the breakfast toast, and when he'd said thank you for the roses so many times, much more than he needed to, he pulled out the line and gave it to Peter. It wasn't exchange, it was the grateful heart." "Oh, I beg your pardon, Peter," said Bobby. "I am so sorry." "Don't mention it," said Peter grandly. "I knew you would be. Sorry. This is terrible. I'm wondering if I've got a funny little bit of cat fluff." The cat has very, very fine hair, and sometimes it just wafts around and sticks to you, and you don't realise it's there until it's tickling. See if a mouthful of two of coffee will help. Anyway, we'll carry on. So then they all went up to the canal bridge. The idea was to fish from the bridge, but the line was not quite long enough. "Never mind," said Bobby. "Let's just stay here and look at things. Everything's so beautiful." It was. The sun was setting in red splendour over the grey and purple hills, and the canal lay smooth and shiny in the shallow. No ripple broke its surface. It was like a grey satin ribbon between the dusky green silk of the meadows that were on each side of its banks. "It's all right," said Peter, "but somehow I can always see how pretty things are much better when I've something to do. Let's get down to the towpath and fish from there." Phyllis and Bobby remembered how the boys on the canal boats had thrown coal at them, and they said so. "Oh, nonsense," said Peter. "There aren't any boys here now. If there were, I'd fight them." Peter's sisters were kind enough not to remind him how he had not fought the boys when the coal had last been thrown. Instead, they said, "All right then," and cautiously climbed down the steep bank to the towing path, because remember they had been up on the bridge. And often the bridges that go over those canals have quite steep sides when they get back across the land part of them, before you can go down to where the actual canal is. The line was carefully baited, and for half an hour they fished patiently, and in vain. Not a single nibble came to nourish the hope in their hearts. And all eyes were intent on the sluggish waters that earnestly pretended they had never harboured a single minnow, when a loud, rough shout made them startled them. "Hi," said the shout in most disagreeable tones. "Get out of that, can't you?" An old white horse coming along the towing path was within half a dozen yards of them. They sprang to their feet and hastily climbed up the bank. "We'll slip down again when they've gone by," said Bobby. But alas, the barge, after the manner of barges, stopped under the bridge. The towpath is there so that the towing horse can walk along it. So it's for the purpose of the barges travelling. People are allowed to walk along them and fish from them and stuff like that. But at this stage, because that was the main purpose of them, it was a little bit more sensible to get out of their way, because they were the ones who had the right to use it, really. "She's going to anchor," said Peter. "Just our luck." The barge did not anchor, because an anchor is not part of a canal boat's furniture, but she was moored with ropes fore and aft, and the ropes were made fast to the palings and to crowbars driven into the ground. "What you staring at?" growled the bargee crossly. We weren't staring, said Bobby. We wouldn't be so rude. Rude be blessed, said the man. Get along with you. Get along yourself, said Peter. He remembered what he had said about fighting boys, and besides, he felt safe halfway up the bank. We've as much right here as anyone else. Oh, have you indeed, said the man. We'll soon see about that. And he came across his deck and began to climb down the side of the barge. Oh, come away, Peter, come away, said Bobby and Phyllis in agonised unison. Not me, said Peter, but you'd better. The girls climbed to the top of the bank and stood ready to bolt for home as soon as they saw their brother out of danger. The way home lay all downhill. They knew that they all ran well. The bargee did not look as if he did. He was red-faced, heavy and beefy. But as soon as his foot was on the towing path, the children saw that they had misjudged him. He made one spring up the bank and caught Peter by the leg, dragged him down, set him on his feet with a shake, took him by the ear and said sternly, Now then, what do you mean by it? Don't you know these here waters is preserved? You ain't no right catching fish here, not to say nothing of your precious cheek. Reserved, like a private fishing area. A lot of the fishing rivers and canals in England, at one time at least, were for private use only. You had to get permission to. Peter was always proud afterwards when he remembered that with the bargee's furious fingers tightening on his ear, the bargee's crimson countenance close to his own, the bargee's hot breath on his neck, he had the courage to speak the truth. I wasn't catching fish, said Peter. That's not your fault, I'll be bound, said the man, giving Peter's ear a twist. Not a hard one, but still a twist. Peter could not say that it was his fault. Bobby and Phyllis had been holding on to the railings above and skipping with anxiety. Now suddenly Bobby slipped through the railings and rushed down the bank towards Peter, so impetuously that Phyllis, following more temperately, felt certain that her sister's descent would end in the waters of the canal. And so it would have done if the bargee hadn't let go of Peter's ear and caught her in his jerseyed arm. Who are you a-shoving of? He said, setting her on her feet. Oh, said Bobby, breathless, I'm not shoving anybody, at least not on purpose. Please don't be cross with Peter. Of course, if it's your canal, we're sorry and we won't any more, but we didn't know it was yours. Go along with you, said the bargee. Yes, we will, indeed we will, said Bobby earnestly, but we do beg your pardon, and really we haven't caught a single fish. I'd tell you directly if we had. Honour bright I would. She held out her hands and Phyllis turned out her little empty pockets to show that really they hadn't any fish concealed about them. Well, said the bargee more gently, cut along then and don't you do it again, that's all. The children hurried up the bank. Chuck us a coat, Maria, shouted the man, and a red-haired woman in a green plaid shawl came out from the cabin door with a baby in her arms and threw a coat to him. He put it on, climbed the bank, and slouched along across the bridge towards the village. You'll find me at the Rose and Crown when you've got the kid to sleep, he called to her from the bridge. When he was out of sight, the children slowly returned. Peter insisted on this. The canal may belong to him, he said, though I don't believe it does, but the bridge is everybody's. Dr. Forrest told me it's public property. I'm not going to be bounced off the bridge by him or anybody else, so I tell you. Peter's ear was still sore, and so were his feelings. The girls followed him as gallant soldiers might follow the leader of a forlorn hope. I do wish you wouldn't, was all they said. Go home if you're afraid, said Peter. Leave me alone. I'm not afraid. The sound of the man's footsteps died away along the quiet road. The peace of the evening was not broken by the notes of the sedge warblers, nor by the voice of the woman in the barge singing her baby to sleep. It was a sad song she sang, something about Bill Bailey and how she wanted him to come home. The children stood, leaning their arms on the parapet of the bridge. They were glad to be quiet for a few minutes because all three hearts were beating much more quickly because of what's just happened. I'm not going to be driven away by any old bargeman, I'm not, said Peter thickly. Of course not, said Phyllis soothingly. You didn't give in to him, and now we might go home, don't you think? No, said Peter. Nothing more was said till the woman got off the barge, climbed the bank, and came across the bridge. She hesitated, looking at the 3 backs of the children, then said, "Ahem." Peter stayed as he was, but the girls looked round. "You mustn't take no notice of my Bill," said the woman. "His bark's worse than his bite. Some of the kids down Farley way is fair terrors. It was them as put his back up, calling out about who ate the puppy pie under the Marlow Bridge." "Who did?" asked Phyllis. "I dunno," said the woman. "Nobody don't know, but somehow, and I don't know why, nor the wherefore of it, them words is poison to a barge master. Don't you take no notice. He won't be back for 2 hours good. You might catch a power of fish before that. The light's good and all," she added. "Thank you," said Bobby. "You're very kind. Where's your baby?" "Asleep in the cabin," said the woman. "He's all right, never wakes afore 12. Regular as a church clock he is." "I'm sorry, Bobby," said Bobby. "I would have liked to see him, close too." "And a finer you never did see, miss, though I says it." The woman's face brightened as she spoke. "Aren't you afraid to leave it?" said Peter. "Lor love you, no," said the woman. "Who'd hurt a little thing like him? Besides, Spot's there. So long." The woman went away. "Shall we go home?" said Phyllis. "You can. I'm going to fish," said Peter briefly. "I thought we came up here to talk about Perks's birthday," said Phyllis. "Perks's birthday'll keep." So they got down to the towing path again and Peter fished. He did not catch anything. It was almost quite dark. The girls were getting tired, and as Bobby said, it was past bedtime, when suddenly Phyllis cried, "What's that?" and she pointed to the canal boat. Smoke was coming from the chimney of the cabin, had indeed been curling softly into the soft evening air all the time, but now other wreaths of smoke were rising, and these were from the cabin door. "It's on fire, that's all," said Peter calmly. "Serve him right." "Oh, how can you?" cried Phyllis. "Think of the poor dear dog." "The baby!" screamed Bobby. In an instant all 3 made for the barge. Her mooring ropes were slack, and the little breeze, hardly strong enough to be felt, had yet been strong enough to drift her stern against the bank. Bobby was first, then came Peter, and it was Peter who slipped and fell. He went into the canal up to his neck, and his feet could not feel the bottom, but his arm was on the edge of the barge. Phyllis caught at his hair. It hurt, but it helped him to get out. Next minute he had leapt onto the barge, Phyllis following. "Not you," he shouted to Bobby. "Me, because I'm wet." That does make sense. He caught up with Bobby at the cabin door and flung her aside very roughly indeed. If they'd been playing, such roughness would have made Bobby weep with tears of rage and pain. Now, though, he flung her onto the edge of the hold so that her knee and elbow were grazed and bruised. She only cried, "No, not you, me," and struggled up again, but not quickly enough. Peter had already gone down 2 of the cabin steps into the thick cloud of thick smoke. He stopped, remembered all he had ever heard of fires, pulled his soaked handkerchief out of his breast pocket and tied it over his mouth. As he pulled it out, he said, "It's all right, hardly any fire at all." And this, though he thought it was a lie, was rather good of Peter. It was meant to keep Bobby from rushing after him into danger. Of course it didn't. The cabin glowed red. A paraffin lamp was burning calmly in an orange mist. "Hi!" said Peter, lifting the handkerchief from his mouth for a moment. "Hi, baby, where are you?" He choked. "Oh, let me go," cried Bobby close behind him. Peter pushed her back more roughly than before and went on. Now what would have happened if the baby hadn't cried, I don't know. But just at that moment it did cry. Peter felt his way through the dark smoke, found something small and soft and warm and alive, picked it up and backed out. Nearly tumbling over Bobby, who was close behind, a dog snapped at his leg, tried to bark, choked. "I've got the kid," said Peter, tearing off the handkerchief and staggering onto the deck. Bobby caught at the place where the bark came from, and her hands met on the fat back of a smooth-haired dog. It turned and fastened its teeth on her hand, but very gently, as much as to say, "I'm bound to bark and bite if strangers come into my master's cabin, but I know you mean well, and so I won't really bite." Bobby dropped the dog. "All right, old man, good dog," said she. "Here, give me the baby, Peter. You're so wet you'll give it cold." Peter was only too glad to hand over the strange little bundle that squirmed and whimpered in his arms. "Now," said Bobby quickly, "you run straight to the Rose and Crown and tell them. Phil and I will stay here with the precious. Hush then, a dear, a duck, a darling. Go now, Peter, run." "I can't run in these things," said Peter firmly. "They're as heavy as lead. I'll walk." "Then I'll run," said Bobby. "Get on the bank, Phil, and I'll hand you the dear." The baby was carefully handed. Phyllis sat down on the bank and tried to hush the baby. Peter wrung the water from his sleeves and knickerbocker legs as well as he could, and it was Bobby who ran like the wind across the bridge and up the long, white, quiet twilight road towards the Rose and Crown. There was a nice old-fashioned room at the Rose and Crown, where bargees and their wives sit of an evening drinking their supper beer and toasting their supper cheese at a glowing basketful of coals that sticks out into the room under a great hooded chimney and is warmer and prettier and more comforting than any other fireplace I ever saw. There was a pleasant party of barge people around the fire. You might not have thought it pleasant, but they did, for they were all friends or acquaintances, and they liked the same sort of things and talked the same sort of talk. This is the real secret of pleasant society. The bargee Bill, whom the children had found so disagreeable, was considered excellent company by his mates. He was telling a tale of his own wrongs, always a thrilling subject. It was his barge he was speaking about. "And he sent down word, 'Paint her inside out, no naming no colour, do you see?' So I gets a lot of green paint and I paints her stem to stern, and I tell you she looked A1. Then he comes along and he says, 'What you paint her all one colour for?' he says. And I says I, 'Cause I thought she'd look first rate,' says I, 'and I think so.' And he says, 'Do ya? Then you can just pay for the bloomin' paint yourself,' says he. And I had to, too." A murmur of sympathy ran round the room. Breaking noisily in on it came Bobby. She burst open the swing door, crying breathlessly, "Bill! I want Bill, the bargeman!" There was a stupefied silence. Pots of beer were held in mid-air, paralysed on their way to thirsty mouths. "Oh!" said Bobby, seeing the barge woman and making for her. "Your barge cabin's on fire! Go quickly!" The woman started to her feet and put a big red hand to her waist on the left side, where your heart seems to be when you are frightened or miserable. "Reginald Horace!" she cried in a terrible voice. "My Reginald Horace!" "All right," said Bobby, "if you mean the baby. Got him out safe. Dog too." She had no breath for more except, "Go on, it's all alight." Then she sank on the alehouse bench, tried to get that breath of relief after running, which people call the second wind. But she felt as though she would never breathe again. Bill the bargee rose slowly and heavily, but his wife was 100 yards up the road before he had quite understood what was the matter. Phyllis, shivering by the canal side, had hardly heard the quick approaching feet before the woman had flung herself on the railing, rolled down the bank, and snatched the baby from her. "Don't," said Phyllis reproachfully. "I just got him to sleep." Bill came up later, talking in a language with which the children were wholly unfamiliar. He leaned onto the barge and dipped up pails of water. Peter helped him, and they put out the fire. Phyllis, the barge woman, and the baby, and presently Bobby too, cuddled together in a heap on the bank. "Lord help me, if it was me left anything as could catch a light," said the woman again and again. But it wasn't she. It was Bill the bargeman, who had knocked his pipe out, and the red ash had fallen on the hearthrug and smouldered there, and at last broken into flame. Though a stern man, he was just. He did not blame his wife for what was his own fault, as many bargemen, and other men too, would have done. Mother was half wild with anxiety when at last the 3 children turned up at Three Chimneys. All very wet by now, for Peter seemed to have come off on the others, but when she had disentangled the truth of what had happened from their mixed and incoherent narrative, she owned that they had done quite right, and could not possibly have done otherwise, nor did she put any obstacle in the way of their accepting the cordial invitation with which the bargeman had parted from them. "Ye be here at 7 tomorrow," he said, "and I'll take you the entire trip to Farley and back, so I will, and not a penny to pay. 19 locks." They did not know what locks were, but they were at the bridge at 7 with bread and cheese and half a soda cake, and quite a quarter of a leg of mutton in a basket. It was a glorious day. The old white horse strained at the ropes. The barge glided smoothly and steadily through the still water. The sky was blue overhead. Mr. Bill was as nice as anyone could possibly be. No one would have thought that he could be the same man who had held Peter by the ear. As for Mrs. Bill, she had always been nice, as Bobby said, and so had the baby, and even Spot, who might have bitten them quite badly if he'd liked. "It was simply ripping, Mother," said Peter, when they reached home very happy and tired, and very dirty, "right over that glorious aqueduct. And locks, you don't know what they're like. You sink into the ground, and then when you feel you're never going to stop going down, 2 great black gates open slowly. You go out, and there you are on the canal, just like you were before." "I know," said Mother. "There are locks on the Thames. Father and I used to go on the river at Marlow before we were married. And the dear darling ducky baby," said Bobby. "It let me nurse it for ages and ages, and it was so good, Mother. Mother, I wish we had a baby to play with." "And everybody was so nice to us," said Phyllis. "Everybody we met. And they say we may fish whenever we like. And Bill is going to show us the way next time he's in these parts. He says we don't know really." "He said you didn't know," said Peter. "But, Mother, he said he'd tell all the bargees up and down the canal that we were the real right sort, and they were to treat us like good pals as we were." "So then I said," Phyllis interrupted, "we'd always each wear a red ribbon when we went fishing by the canal so they'd know it was us. And we were the real right sort and be nice to us." "So you've made another lot of friends," said Mother. "First the railway and then the canal." "Oh, yes," said Bobby. "I think everyone in the world is friends if you can only get them to see you. You don't want to be unfriends." "Perhaps you're right," said Mother, and she sighed. "Come, chicks, it's bedtime." "Yes," said Phyllis. "Oh dear, and we went up there to talk about what we'd do for Perks's birthday, and we haven't talked a single thing about it." "No more we have," said Bobby, "but Peter's saved Reginald Horace's life. I think that's about good enough for one evening." "Bobby would have saved him if I hadn't knocked her down. Twice I did," said Peter, loyally. "So would I," said Phyllis, "if I'd known what to do." "Yes," said Mother, "you've saved a little child's life. I do think that's enough for one evening. Oh, my darlings, thank God you're all safe." And that's the end of that chapter. And I'm having a drink of water because my mouth's a bit dry. And how are you all? And how are you, Rooster? Good to see you. So, how's it going for everybody? You having fun? Or are you using this as a nice bit of light relief in your day or your night? So I'm just going to say hello to everybody who might be here who hasn't said that they're here, because they don't have to say that they're here. So I'm going to say hi to Nikki and hi to possibly Forez, and I know I've already said hi to Rooster. I'm not sure if anyone else is here specifically at the moment, but welcome. We're reading, I'm Jev, I read old-fashioned stories. A lot of the old-fashioned stories I read are English ones. Some of the ones I'm going to read in a while will be old American ones as well. All of them write differently to how stories are written now. The feel of them is quite different. Sometimes there'll be things that are done a bit differently to what we think is okay these days. Like in this story, this chapter we've just had, the barge lady had left the baby asleep on the barge. Now, normally in their life, in that time period, that would have been okay, because she knows the baby very well. She knows it goes to sleep and it stays asleep. And so she felt that it was actually okay. And it couldn't fall anywhere. It wasn't going anywhere. That's the first time they've obviously had a fire catch hold in the barge, or she wouldn't have done that. Children running around on their own, that used to be considered okay. We used to when I was growing up. These days, because the world appears to be so much more unsafe, we don't let children be on their own out in the countryside. But if you live in a countryside where there's not a lot of people around and you know everybody that's there, you can have a lot of fun running around and exploring and adventuring in the woods and following alongside canals, as long as you're not silly enough to fall in, or if you do fall in, that you get out safely. You've got people who can help you. All that sort of thing. So part of it for me, reading these stories, is because it just opens up a whole other world, a world that we don't have anymore. And it's nice. It's nice to imagine other places, other times. So enough talking. I shall have one more mouthful of water. And then I shall carry on reading. Yes, I shall. Right, so we are reading The Railway Children by Edith Nesbit, E. Nesbit, and we are reading chapter 9, The Pride of Perks. Perks being the porter, remember? It was breakfast time. Mother's face was very bright as she poured the milk and ladled out the porridge. "I've sold another story, chickies," she said, "the one about the king of the mussels." Mussels like seashells, mussels. Not mussels like mussels. I'm telling you that because the way it's written, so you know what I'm referring to. Mussels. The one about the king of the mussels, so there'll be buns for tea. You can go and get them as soon as they're baked. About 11, isn't it? Because the bread shop in town, the grocer's in town, has buns and other bread for sale, and they make it there themselves, not off in a factory somewhere. Peter, Phyllis and Bobby exchanged glances with each other, 6 glances in all. Then Bobby said, "Mother, would you mind if we didn't have the buns for tea tonight, but on the 15th? That's next Thursday." "I don't mind when you have them, dear," said Mother. "But why?" "Because it's Perk's birthday," said Bobby. "He's 32 and he says he doesn't keep his birthday anymore because he's got other things to keep, not rabbits or secrets, but the kids and the missus." "You mean his wife and children?" said Mother. "Yes," said Phyllis. "It's the same thing, isn't it? And we thought we'd make a nice birthday for him. He's been so awfully jolly decent to us, you know, Mother," said Peter. "And we agreed that next bun day we'd ask you if we could." "But suppose there hadn't been a bun day before the 15th? "Oh, then we would mean to ask you to let us anticipate it and go without when the bun day came." "Anticipate," said Mother. "I see. Certainly, it would be nice to put his name on the buns with pink sugar, wouldn't it?" "Perks," said Peter. "It's not a pretty name." "His other name's Albert," said Phyllis. "I asked him once." "We might put A.P.," said Mother. "I'll show you how when the day comes." This was all very well as far as it went, but even 14 halfpenny buns with A.P. on them and pink sugar do not of themselves make a very grand celebration. "There are always flowers, of course," said Bobby later, when a really earnest council was being held on the subject in the hayloft where the broken chaff-cutting machine was, and the row of holes to drop hay through into the hay racks over the mangers of the stables below. "He's got lots of flowers of his own," said Peter. "But it's always nice to have them given to you," said Bobby, "however many you've got of your own. We can use flowers for trimmings to the birthday, but there must be something to trim besides buns." "Let's all be quiet and think," said Phyllis. "No one's to speak until it's thought of something." So they were all quiet, and so very still that a brown rat thought that there was no one in the loft and came out rather boldly. When Bobby sneezed, the rat was quite shocked and hurried away, for he saw that a hayloft where such things could happen was no place for a respectable middle-aged rat that liked a quiet life. "Hooray!" cried Peter suddenly. "I've got it!" He jumped up and kicked at the loose hay. "What?" said the others eagerly. "Why, Perks is so nice to everybody. There must be lots of people in the village who'd like to help make him a birthday. Let's go round and ask everybody." "Mother said we weren't to ask people for things," said Bobby doubtfully. "For ourselves, she meant, silly, not for other people. I'll ask the old gentleman too. See if I don't," said Peter. "Let's ask Mother first," said Bobby. "Oh, what's the use of bothering Mother about every little thing," said Peter, "especially when she's busy. Come on, let's go down to the village now and begin." So they went. The old lady at the post office said she didn't see why Perks should have a birthday any more than anyone else. "No," said Bobby, "I should like everyone to have one, only we know when his is." "Mine's tomorrow," said the old lady, "and much notice anyone will take of it. Go along with you." So they went, and some people were kind, and some were crusty, and some would give and some would not. It's rather difficult work asking for things even for other people, as you have no doubt found if you have ever tried it. When the children got home and counted what they had been given and what had been promised, they felt that for the first day it was not so bad. Peter wrote down the lists of the things in the little pocket book where he kept the numbers of his engines. These were the lists. Given: a tobacco pipe from the sweet shop, 1/2 pound of tea from the grocer's, a woolen scarf slightly faded from the draper's, which was the other side of the grocer's, a stuffed squirrel from the doctor. Promised: a piece of meat from the butcher, 6 fresh eggs from the woman who lived in the old turnpike cottage, a piece of honeycomb and 6 bootlaces from the cobbler, and an iron shovel from the blacksmith's. Very early next morning Bobby got up and woke Phyllis. This had been agreed on between them. They had not told Peter because they thought he would think it silly, but they told him afterwards when it had turned out all right. They cut a big bunch of roses and put it in a basket with the needle-book that Phyllis had made for Bobby on her birthday, and a very pretty blue necktie of Phyllis's. Then they wrote on a paper, "For Mrs. Ransom, with our best love, because it is her birthday." Necktie being a ribbon. And they put the paper in the basket, and they took it to the post office and went in and put it on the counter and ran away before the old woman at the post office had time to get into her shop. When they got home, Peter had grown confidential over helping Mother to get the breakfast, and had told her their plans. "There's no harm in it," said Mother, "but it depends how you do it. I only hope he won't be offended and think it's charity. Poor people are very proud, you know." "It isn't because he's poor," said Phyllis. "It's because we're fond of him." "I'll find some things that Phyllis has outgrown," said Mother, "if you're quite sure you can give them to him without his being offended. I should like to do some little thing for him because he's been so kind for you. I can't do much because we're poor ourselves. What are you writing, Bobby?" "Nothing particular," said Bobby, who had suddenly begun to scribble. "I'm sure he'd like the things, Mother." The morning of the 15th was spent very happily in getting the buns and watching Mother make AP on them with pink sugar. You know how it's done, of course. You beat up whites of eggs and mix powdered sugar with them and put a few drops of cochineal in. It's a red food dye. Used to be. And then you make a cone of clean white paper with a little hole at the pointed end and put the pink egg sugar in at the big end. It runs slowly out at the pointed end, and you write the letters with it just as though it were a great big fat pen full of pink sugar ink. The buns looked beautiful with AP on every one, and when they were put in a cool oven to set the sugar, the children went up to the village to collect the honey and the shovel and the other promised things. The old lady at the post office was standing on her doorstep. The children said, "Good morning," politely as they passed. "Here, stop a bit," she said, so they stopped. "Those roses," said she. "Did you like them?" said Phyllis. "They were as fresh as fresh. I made the needle-book, but it was Bobby's present." She skipped joyously as she spoke. "Here's your basket," said the post office woman. She went in and brought out the basket. It was full of fat, red gooseberries. "I dare say Perks's children would like them," said she. "You are an old dear," said Phyllis, throwing her arms round the old lady's fat waist. "Perks will be pleased." "He won't be half so pleased as I was with your needle-book and the tie and the pretty flowers and all," said the old lady, patting Phyllis's shoulder. "You're good little souls that you are. Look here, I've got a pram round the back in the wood lodge. It was got for my Emmy's first, that didn't live but 6 months, and she never had but that one." Emmy's first child, who didn't live past 6 months old, and she hasn't had any more children. "I'd like Mrs. Perks to have it. It'd be a help to her with that great boy of hers. Will you take it along?" "Oh," said the children together. When Mrs. Ransom had got out the perambulator and taken off the careful papers that covered it, and dusted it all over, she said, "Well, there it is. I don't know but what I'd have given it to her before I'd have thought of it, if I'd thought of it. Only I didn't quite know if she'd accept it from me. You tell her it was Emmy's little one's pram." Oh, isn't it nice to think that there is going to be a real live baby in it again? Yes, said Mrs. Ransom, sighing, and then laughing. Here, I'll give you some peppermint cushions for the little ones, and then you run along before I give you the roof off my head and the clothes off my back. All the things that had been collected for Perks were packed into the perambulator, and at 3:30, Peter and Bobby and Phyllis wheeled it down to the little yellow house where Perks lived. The house was very tidy. On the window ledge was a jug of wild flowers, big daisies, and red sorrel, and feathery, flowery grasses. There was a sound of splashing from the wash-house, and a partly washed boy put his head round the door. "Mother's a-changing of herself," he said. "Down in a minute," a voice sounded down the narrow, freshly scrubbed stairs. The children waited. Next moment the stairs creaked and Mrs. Perks came down, buttoning her bodice. Her hair was brushed very smooth and tight, and her face shone with soap and water. "I'm a bit late changing, miss," she said to Bobby, "owing to me having had an extra clear up today along of Perks happening to name its being his birthday. I don't know what put it into his head to think of such a thing. We keeps the children's birthdays, of course, but him and me, we're too old for such like, as a general rule." "We knew it was his birthday," said Peter, "and we've got some presents for him outside in the perambulator." As the presents were being unpacked, Mrs. Perks gasped. When they were all unpacked, she surprised and horrified the children by sitting suddenly down on a wooden chair and bursting into tears. "Oh, don't," said everybody. "Oh, please don't." And Peter added, perhaps a little impatiently, "What on earth's the matter? You don't mean to say you don't like it?" Mrs. Perks only sobbed. The Perks children, now as shiny-faced as anyone could wish, stood at the wash-house door and scowled at the intruders. There was an awkward silence. An awkward silence. "Don't you like it?" said Peter again, while his sisters patted Mrs. Perks on the back. She stopped crying as suddenly as she had begun. There, don't mind me, I'm all right," she said. "Like it? Why, it's a birthday such as Perks never had, not even when he was a boy and stayed with his uncle, who was a corn chandler in his own account. He failed afterwards. Like it? Oh," and then she went on and said all sorts of things that I won't write down because I'm sure that Peter and Bobby and Phyllis would not like me to. Their ears got hotter and hotter, and their faces redder and redder, at the kind things Mrs. Perks said. They felt they had done nothing to deserve all this praise. At last Peter said, "Look here, we're glad you're pleased, but if you go on saying things like that, we must go home, and we did want to stay and see if Mr. Perks is pleased too, but we can't stand this." "I won't say another word," said Mrs. Perks with a beaming face. "But that needn't stop me thinking, need it? For if ever—" "Can we have a plate for the buns?" said Bobby abruptly, and then Mrs. Perks hastily laid the table for tea, and the buns and the honey and the gooseberries were displayed on plates, and the roses were put in 2 glass jam jars, and the tea table looked as Mrs. Perks said, fit for a prince. "To think," she said, "me getting the place tidy early and the little uns getting the wildflowers and all, when never did I think there would be anything more for him except the ounce of his pet particular that I got off Saturday, and has been saving up for him ever since. Bless us, he is early." Perks had indeed unlatched the gate of the little front door. "Oh," whispered Bobby, "let's hide in the back kitchen and you tell him about it. But give him the tobacco first because you got it for him. That's his pet particular, his favourite. And when you've told him, we'll all come in and shout, 'Many happy returns.'" It was a very nice plan, but it did not quite come off. To begin with, there was only just time for Peter and Bobby and Phyllis to rush into the wash-house, pushing the young and open-mouthed Perks children in front of them. There was not time to shut the door, so that without at all meaning it, they had to listen in to what went on in the kitchen. The wash-house was a tight fit for the Perks children and the 3 Chimneys children, as well as all the wash-house's proper furniture, including the mangle and the copper. "Hello, old woman," they heard Mr. Perks say. "Here's a pretty set-out." "It's your birthday tea, Bert," said Mrs. Perks, "and here's an ounce of your extra particular. I got it a Saturday along of your happening to remember it was your birthday today." Good old girl, said Mr. Perks, and there was a sound of a kiss. But what's that pram doing here? And what's all these bundles, and where did you get the sweet stuff? And the children did not hear what Mrs. Perks replied, because just then Bobby gave a start, put her hand in her pocket, and all her body grew stiff with horror. Oh, she whispered to the others, whatever shall we do? I forgot to put the labels on any of the things. He won't know what's from who. He'll think it's all us and that we're trying to be grand or charitable or something horrid. Hush, said Peter, and then they heard the voice of Mr. Perks, loud and rather angry. I don't care, he said. I won't stand it, so I tell you straight. But, said Mrs. Perks, it's them children you make a fuss about, the children from Three Chimneys. I don't care, said Perks firmly. Not if it was an angel from heaven. We got on all right all these years and no favours asked. I'm not going to begin these sort of charity goings-on at my time of life, so don't you think it now. Oh, hush, said poor Mrs. Perks. Bert, shut your silly tongue, for goodness sake. The all three of 'em's in the wash-house, are listening to every word you speaks. Then I'll give them something to listen to, said the angry Perks. I've spoke my mind to them afore, and I'll do it again, he added, and he took 2 strides to the wash-house door and flung it wide open, as wide, that is, as it would go, with the tightly packed children behind it. Come out, said Perks, come out and tell me what you mean by it. Have I ever complained to you of being short, as you comes this charity lay over me? Oh, said Phyllis, I thought you'd be so pleased. I'd never try to be kind to anyone else as long as I live. No, I won't, not never. She burst into tears. We didn't mean any harm, said Peter. It ain't what you mean so much as what you does, said Perks. Oh, don't, cried Bobby, trying hard to be braver than Phyllis and to find more words than Peter had done for explaining in. We thought you'd love it. We always have things on our birthdays. Oh, yes, said Perks. Your own relations, that's different. Oh, no, Bobby answered, not our own relations. All the servants always gave us things at home and us to them when it was their birthdays, and when it was mine and Mother gave me the brooch, like a buttercup. Mrs. Vinnie gave me 2 lovely glass pots, and nobody thought she was coming the charity lay over us. If it had been glass pots here, said Perks, I wouldn't have said so much. It's there being all this heaps and heaps of things I can't stand. No, nor won't neither. They're not all from us, said Peter, only we forgot to put the labels on. They're from all sorts of people in the village. Who put 'em up to it, I'd like to know, said Perks. Why, we did, sniffed Phyllis. Perks sat down heavily in the elbow chair, that's the chair with arms on it, and looked at them with what Bobby afterwards described as withering glances of gloomy despair. So you've been round telling the neighbours we can't make both ends meet. Well, now you've disgraced us as deep as you can in the neighbourhood. You can just take the whole bag of tricks back where it come from. Very much obliged, I'm sure. I don't doubt but what you meant it kind, but I'd rather not be acquainted with you any longer if it's all the same to you. He deliberately turned the chair round, so that his back was turned to the children. The legs of the chair grated on the brick floor, and that was the only sound that broke the silence. Then suddenly Bobby spoke. Look here, she said, this is most awful. That's what I says, said Perks, not turning round. Look here, said Bobby desperately, we'll go if you like, and you needn't be friends with us any more if you don't want, but we shall always be friends with you, however nasty you are to us, sniffed Phyllis wildly. Be quiet, said Peter in a fierce aside. But before we go, Bobby went on desperately, do let us show you the labels we wrote to put on the things. I don't want to see no labels, said Perks, except proper luggage ones in my own walk of life. Do you think I've kept respectable and out of debt over what I gets, and her having to take in washing to be give away for a laughing stock to all the neighbours? Laughing, said Peter. You don't know. You're a very hasty gentleman, whined Phyllis. You know you were wrong once before about us not telling you the secret about the Russian. Do let Bobby tell you about the labels. Well, go ahead, said Perks grudgingly. Well then, said Bobby, fumbling miserably, yet not without hope, in her tightly stuffed pocket. We wrote down all the things everybody said when they gave us the things, with the people's names, because Mother said we ought to be careful, but I wrote down what she said, and you'll see. But Bobby could not read the labels just at once. She had to swallow once or twice before she could begin. Mrs. Perks had been crying steadily ever since her husband had opened the wash-house door. Now she caught her breath, choked, and said, "Don't you upset yourself, Missy. I know you meant it kind, if he doesn't." "May I read the labels?" cried Bobby, crying onto the slips as she tried to sort them. "Mother's first, it says, 'Little clothes for Mrs. Perks' children.' Mother said, 'I'll find some of Phyllis's things that she's grown out of if you're quite sure Mr. Perks wouldn't be offended, and I think it's meant for charity. I'd like to do some little thing for him because he's so kind to you. I can't do much because we're poor ourselves.'" Bobby paused. "That's all right," said Perks. "Your ma's a born lady. We'll keep the little frocks and what not now." "Then there's the perambulator and the gooseberries and the sweets," said Bobby. "They're from Mrs. Ransom. She said, 'I dare say Mr. Perks's children would like the sweets, and the perambulator was got for my Emmy's first. It didn't live but 6 months, and she's never had but that one. I'd like Mrs. Perks to have it. It would be a help with her fine boy. I'd have given it before if I'd been sure she'd accept it from me.' She told me to tell you," Bobby added, "that it was her Emmy's little one's pram." "I can't send that pram back, Bert," said Mrs. Perks firmly, "and I won't, so don't you ask me." "I'm not asking anything," said Perks gruffly. "Then the shovel," said Bobby. "Mr. James made it for you himself, and he said," where is it? "Oh, yes, here. He said, 'You tell Mr. Perks it's a pleasure to make a little trifle for a man as is so much respected.' And then he said he wished he could shoe your children and his own children like they do the horses because, well, he knew what shoe leather was." "James is a good enough chap," said Perks. "Then the honey," said Bobby in haste, "and the bootlaces. He said he respected a man that paid his way, and the butcher said the same, and the old turnpike woman said many was the time you lent her a hand with her garden when you were a lad, and things like that came home to roost." I don't know what she meant. "And everybody who gave anything said they liked you, and it was a very good idea of ours, and nobody said anything about charity or anything horrid like that. And the old gentleman gave Peter a gold pound for you and said you were a man who knew your work, and I thought you'd love to know how fond people are of you, and I never was so unhappy in my life. Goodbye. I hope you'll forgive us some day." She could say no more, and she turned to go. "Stop," said Perks, still with his back to them. "I take back every word I've said contrary to what you'd wish. Nell, set on the kettle." "We'll take the things away if you're unhappy about them," said Peter, "but I think everybody'll be most awfully disappointed, as well as us." "I'm not unhappy about them," said Perks. "I don't know," he added suddenly, wheeling the chair round and showing a very odd-looking, screwed-up face. "I don't know as ever I was better pleased. Not so much with the presents, though they're an A1 collection, but the kind respect of our neighbours. That's worth having, eh, Nell?" "I think it's all worth having," said Mrs. Perks, "and you've made a most ridiculous fuss about nothing, Bert, if you ask me." "No, I ain't," said Perks firmly. "If a man didn't respect himself, no one wouldn't do it for him." "But everyone respects you," said Bobby. "They all said so." "I knew you'd like it when you really understood," said Phyllis brightly. "Huh! You'll stay to tea?" said Mr. Perks. Later on, Peter proposed Mr. Perks' health, and Mr. Perks proposed a toast also honoured in tea, and the toast was, "May the garland of friendship be ever green," which was much more poetical than anyone had expected from him. "Jolly good little kids, those," said Mr. Perks to his wife as they went to bed. "Oh, they're all right, bless their hearts," said his wife. "It's you that's the aggravatingest old thing as ever was. I was ashamed of you, I tell you. You didn't need to be, old gal. I climbed down Hampson soon as I understood it wasn't charity, but charity's what I never did abide and won't neither." All sorts of people were made happy by that birthday party. Mr. Perks and Mrs. Perks and the little Perkses by all the nice things and by the kind thoughts of their neighbours, the Three Chimneys children by the success, undoubted though unexpectedly delayed, of their plan, and Mrs. Ransom every time she saw the fat Perks baby in the perambulator. Mrs. Perks made made quite a round of visits to thank people for their kind birthday presents, and after each visit felt that she had a better friend than she had thought. Yes, said Perks reflectively, it's not so much what you does as what you means, and that's what I say. Now, if it had been charity— Oh, drat charity, said Mrs. Perks. Nobody won't offer you charity, Bert, however much you was to want it, I lay. That was just friendliness, that was. When the clergyman called on Mrs. Perks, she told him all about it. It was friendliness, wasn't it, sir? I think, said the clergyman, it was what is sometimes called loving kindness. So you see, it was all right in the end. But if one does that sort of thing, one has to be careful to do it in the right way. For as Mr. Perks said when he had had time to think it over, it's not so much what you do as what you mean. And I'm going to stop with today's reading there, with just 2 chapters, because the next one's another quite long one, and I'm feeling rather tired, and I've also got some more work to do. So thank you for being here with me. Thank you for enjoying stories with me. Please do join our Discord server, Discord, and give story suggestions if you have them. And otherwise, if you want to catch up on other stories, or in a couple of weeks' time catch up on the earlier parts of this story, you can go over to our YouTube channel and listen to other stories that we've already done there. So the stories are in playlists by what the book is. There's one playlist which is a combined one, which is the Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass stories, I think. There's also Millie Molly Mandy stories, there's The Secret Garden, there's A Little Princess, there's The Princess and the Goblin, there's The Princess and Curdie, and there will be more, much more to come. So, and we had The Wind in the Willows too. That was a great read. So look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.